Hi, everybody. Today, I want to talk about a topic that I've been following now for quite a while. It was really first brought to my attention by somebody in the state of New York who asked me and others how we felt about the cash bail reforms that were taking place in the state of New York. Now, I don't live in New York. I really frankly didn't know that much about it, so it set me off on a quest to find out what exactly they meant by cash bail reform. I think they actually phrased it as the elimination of cash bail, which is not actually true in all cases, but I think a more proper term would be cash bail reform. So I started to look into it, and I looked into it in New York, and then I looked into it in some other places, specifically California, where this is happening. And then not so long ago, I was talking to a court here in Michigan, and to a probation officer in Michigan. And to be quite honest, I had not really looked into what was happening in the state of Michigan at that point. But this probation officer raised the issue with me and talked about some of their frustrations and some of the changes that they had in their procedures. Now, this conversation took place in the context of our needs assessment and how there was a increased focus on pre-trial risk assessments, and how our needs assessment satisfies that need, at least in that case. And so that was sort of the context of that conversation. But it has been an interesting thing for me to follow, just as sort of a general interest, as somebody who has an interest in the criminal justice system, and a professional interest in the fact that we provide these sort of pretrial risk and needs assessments. So I started to look into it, and it's an interesting trend, and we're going to see where this goes. But just a little bit of definition here. Cash bail reform, to put it simply, is that in many cases now there is the elimination of cash bail that is thought to be, at least the argument is made, that it is punitive for people who can't afford cash bail, and they are incarcerated because they can't afford cash bail, and they may or may not be guilty of what they've been arrested for, but the requirement of cash bail might require them to use a bond agent, for example, which is can be an expensive cost. It may being if they can't afford that and they're incarcerated, they may lose their jobs. So there's a significant financial penalty for cash bail for people who can't really afford it. On the other hand, the argument can be made that people who are guilty of offenses but have the means may meet the bail requirement, and they may be released when in fact they are a risk to society. So there's a couple different ways to look at it, and there have been some studies. I did find some information out of Washington, D.C., where they have had a program similar to this in place for quite some time. The fear, of course, is that if that people are released on their own recognizance and cash bail is not required, the fear, of course, is that they won't show up for their scheduled hearings. And I saw this study out of Washington, D.C. that said 89% of the time people are showing up to their court hearings. So they're seeing some success with this kind of program that eliminates a cash bail. But I've seen other studies that show that minorities, for example, are released on their own recognizance at a lower rate. So both sides of this issue are complex and can be problematic. But the one thing, the professional interest I have in this is that there is in this sort of scenario, there's an increased emphasis on pretrial risk assessment. I believe, and I may have a few of the details here wrong, but in California, if you're arrested and in jail for a number of misdemeanor charges, you're going to be released in 12 hours. And then for other charges, I believe it's 36 or 48 hours that you're held, and during that time there's a risk assessment done to determine your level of risk, and then that is going to be determined whether or not you might be released on your own recognizance. And similar programs around the country. And then in talking to somebody here in Michigan, a probation officer, who says that they have changed their procedures and they've actually increased their emphasis on these pretrial risk assessments, which fits very well with what we do professionally. So I have just a personal interest in this because it's something that I find interesting, but also a professional interest in that our needs assessment is quite a strong risk assessment. There is a very strong recidivism risk assessment component to the needs assessment, and if that's something that is of interest to you, we'd like to talk to you about that. But I'm going to continue to follow this. If I have any significant updates, I'll do a further post. But I'm interested in what you think. I'm interested in hearing your comments. You can email me, Jim at adeincorp.com. Depending on what platform you're viewing this on, there may be the ability for you to make comments, and I'd be interested in following that. But I've looked at there's lots of information online. I looked at information from New York and Washington D.C. and Michigan and California and some other locations. So it's out there if you are interested in looking into this for yourself. But stay tuned here. We're gonna keep an eye on this and see how our needs and risk assessment might be a part of this overall cash bail reform movement. So anyway, stay tuned, and thanks for listening.